Here at Blue Fox Properties, we're often approached by homeowners who are trying to decide whether they should rent or sell the home they currently live in. And they didn't buy the house as an investment, but they're now considering renting as an option for one reason or another. There are a lot more things to consider than people realize. Hi, my name is Steve Schultz with Blue Fox Properties here in Tucson, Arizona. We specialize in managing rental houses, and we've been doing so since 2009. In this video, I'll try to answer your question of, should I rent or sell my home? So one of the things I believe is not everyone should be a landlord, and not all houses make a good rental, as you see here. So let's cover some of the things as it relates to that we should be taking a look at. The first thing we're going to take a look at is a financial analysis. I would actually argue this should probably be the last thing we take a look at, but it's usually what people want to talk about. So let's just approach that first, meet everybody where they are, and we'll cover that. The next thing is, would the house even make a good rental? Not all houses will. So we'll cover some of the things you want to think about there. Your risk tolerance. And then, do you have the financial resources that you need to be successful in being a good landlord? And then, what are your long-term goals? So this isn't an exhaustive list, but certainly a number of things you should take into account at a minimum as far as what I would recommend. So let's jump right into the financial analysis. I'm going to take us out of the deck here and take us into a different document where we're going to take a look at the rent versus sell financial analysis. So you see there, my initial disclaimer is this is for illustration purposes only. It is very simplified, and your situation may vary widely. Really, the best way to analyze real estate is using a calculation called the internal rate of return. The challenge with the internal rate of return, or IRR, is that it's really complicated and very few people know how to compute it. And so that's why we're going to look at this in a very basic way so you can see the different components. All these components that we're going to look at would play into the IRR calculation, but just want to present them to you so you can get them conceptually. And then, if you do want to actually do this analysis, I encourage you to seek a financial expert, tax professional to help you evaluate your specific situation. So what we're going to look at, you can see the assumptions here. This is very typical of our current market. So this isn't something that's like some wild, we're just picking numbers out of the air. This is very typical for our current market. So we're going to assume the house is valued at $400,000. The mortgage amount is $2,400, and that's PITI, which in our industry means principal, interest, taxes, and insurance. So that's all included in that $2,400. We're going to assume the rent amount is $2,100. I know what you're thinking already. Oopsie, we're already in the negative there as it relates to cash flow. Wait, it gets worse, because on the next line, you see the monthly expenses, including HOA dues, repairs, management fees, all of that stuff. $450 per month. So a lot of people think cash flow is the difference between mortgage payment and rent. It's not. We also need to calculate in all of those expenses. We're going to assume an annual appreciation of 3%, which is pretty good, agreed upon historical average here in the United States. And then we're going to assume the loan pay down is $367 per month. Now, all of this information and some of the information I'll present as well, if you get on your mortgage statement or on your bank's login, you can actually see a lot of this different information. What is the loan pay down per year? What is your interest per year, etc. So we'll talk through a little bit about that in just a moment. We're going to assume the cost to sell the house is 8% of the sales price. And this would include commissions, closing costs, HOA transfer fees, all that kind of stuff. Again, understanding your specific situation, that could be more or less depending on what you're doing. So first off, let's take a look at the monthly cash flow. So we already talked about $2,100 per month in rent, that $2,400 per month in mortgage payment, and then the $450 per month in expenses. So if you add all that up, that comes out to a negative $750 per month, which is negative $9,000 for the year. And you say, oh man, forget this whole rental business. We need to run away as fast as we can. Well, hang on a second, because I want to show you more. This is where a lot of people stop and say, the rentals, they just don't work. It's impossible to cash flow. It might be true, but renting your property still could make sense from a financial perspective. So let's continue on. So we start out negative $9,000 for the year. The other thing, remember, in this rental scenario, we are going for a year. So this isn't today. It is a year out of when we're looking at these numbers. Next, let's look at the annual appreciation. So we said that's $400,000 house. 3% per year. So that's $12,000 for the year. So now all of a sudden things are looking a little better, right? minus $9,000 plus $12,000, we're in the positive, right? $3,000 for the end of the year. But wait, there's more. So now let's look at the loan pay down. That $367 per month times 12 months. Now we're at plus approximately $4,400 for the year. And then you're going to have some tax benefits too. So interest, here we've assumed $21,000 in interest for the year. We've assumed a 20% tax bracket. Again, your situation may be very different, but using this example, if we use those numbers, that comes out to a $4,200 tax benefit for 1 year. Again, positive number. Depreciation, you're also going to be allowed to take that. So in the depreciation, a residential property, our U.S. government has decided that the building can be depreciated over 27.5 years. That comes out to approximately 3.6% per year. And if we're assuming the building value is 80% of the total property value, that's the standard calculation, again, used by the government, is we have $320,000 then that can be depreciated at 3.6% per year. That's a tax benefit of $11,520. So all the green numbers you see there are positives. The negative $9,000 is red. And let's sum all those up. If we do all that math, we get to a positive $23,120 for the year. So this is the gain. Now, this gain could be offset by things like tenant damage, non-payment rent, other rental things that could happen. But just in a very, like I said, conceptual, basic way to help you understand the different components, that's where we land. So that's the rental analysis. So now let's continue to the sell analysis, which this calculation is even that much simpler. If we assume that 8% cost to sell on that $400,000 property, we're going to pay $32,000 to sell that house. Now, there could also be capital gains tax, and here's where it comes in. So you think, okay, negative $32,000, we said the rental situation after a year. Again, you have to get to the end of the year. That's not today, that's the end of the year, and that difference there. So a plus $23,000 and change versus a minus $32,000. So sometimes what happens is if you have equity, so let's say you only owe $300,000, then that $32,000 is going to be paid by that equity. You're still going to walk away with a check for whatever that difference is, whether that's $68,000 minus taxes, right? All that kind of stuff. So, maybe that makes the most sense for you. You walk away, you're good, done. The other side of that is if you don't have any equity, do you have $32,000 to show up at closing with a check to close that house to get rid of it? Most people don't. So that's where that negative $750 a month comes into play. What would you rather do? Pay that negative $750 a month or pay $32,000 at closing when you go to sell the property? So that's the financial analysis, things to think about financially. But even if on just a financial analysis basis, you think, okay, well, renting's the answer. Hang on, let's talk more. Because again, I don't think rentals are for everybody. I'm a big believer in rentals personally. Obviously, our firm, that's what we do. I own rental properties personally. So big fan of rental properties, but I don't believe they're for everyone. So let's go back to the deck and continue the conversation beyond financials. So let's talk about whether or not the house would even be a good rental anyway. So let's take a look at some of the different things. So is it too high end? And what I mean by too high end is a luxury home. So right now, per MLS statistics, the average rent is about $1,800 per month. So if you have a very high-end home, the rental rate, let's say, might be $5,000. You think, great, I'm getting more rent. Isn't that awesome? Well, the problem with that is in our market, there aren't a lot of renters that have $5,000 to pay rent with. So you're looking at a smaller tenant pool, which means longer vacancy times. So that's one of the challenges there. And are you prepared to handle that? Are the components too custom? And what I mean by components is, let's say there are cabinets, and let's say those cabinets are from Italy. And so they are very custom, very specific. If one of those cabinets got damaged, could you get something to replace it that looks similar to what you already have and match the rest of the cabinets, for example? So that is where you want to take that into account too. Is that something that you want to deal with, that you could live with if there was one kitchen cabinet that didn't match the rest because that one's not from Italy. That was something we had to make up to make work because we couldn't get another one from Italy, or maybe they're just not made anymore. Maybe they were from the US and super custom, but they just don't make them anymore, right? So that's another thing to take into consideration. Another item is how far out of town is it? So usually when we're getting this question of should I rent or should I sell, it's usually in down markets. And so what happens in down markets is the further you get out from the center of town, the less people that are looking, which means longer vacancy periods. So that's something to keep in mind. Again, we're back to that vacancy issue of, are you prepared for that? Is it too unique in terms of the floor plan or design elements? So what I mean here is I have seen houses where you have to go outside to get from the kitchen to the bedrooms. And that might have been great for that person that owned that house, but for the rest of the population in Tucson, that's not something a lot of people are interested in. And so that could be something that's limiting, something that's unique with the house, be it floor plan or something else, or it could be design elements. And what I mean by that is I have seen houses where the bathroom sinks literally were only 2 inches deep. So it looked cool, but as far as practicality and usability, they're practically unusable. So those are some things to take into account as well. So is it a good median/average house? This is the sweet spot, I believe. And this is what we really love to manage because they're the most affordable. These are the 1,600 square foot house, 3-bedroom, 2-bath in tract neighborhoods. Really, really good, solid, what might be called bread and butter properties. And so that's something that's really attractive. If it's closer, again, in town as opposed to being further out of town, also a benefit. But is it something that fits in that regard? And by the way, this isn't an all-inclusive and exhaustive list, so there are other things too, but I'm just trying to get you thinking about some of the things you might want to consider. So let's talk about your risk tolerance. The first thing is the unpredictability of the resident. Obviously, in our business, there are inherent risks in rental properties, and we cannot reduce that risk to zero. So in the case of the resident, we do not control the resident. We do not live at the property 24 hours a day, obviously. There could be different things as it relates to late rent payment, no rent payment. Do they follow the HOA rules? Do they follow the lease? So all of those factors can come into play, and do you have the mindset and are you prepared to deal with that should they arise? If they don't pay rent, likely there's going to be an eviction, which is typically going to lead to property damage. So that's something to be prepared for as well. So again, not something that is necessarily going to happen, but certainly a possibility. Normal wear and tear. Here in the state of Arizona, for example, most judges determine that the life of carpets and paint, for example, is 5 years. So even if the tenant has lived there for 5 years and they damage the paint or carpet, and that's how old that is, judges won't award damages for that. So are you prepared for that? You understand that what's normal wear and tear based on the definition of what the judges will uphold may be different than what you're used to or what you would consider normal wear and tear. And then property damage as it relates to the resident could be accidental or intentional. So as I mentioned a moment ago, kind of about the cabinet thing. Maybe a child accidentally did something and broke the cabinet door, let's say. I don't know. Or maybe it was intentional and they absolutely intended to do it, right? So that's something to be aware of as well. And then pets and assistance animals. So as it relates to pets, as a property owner, you can limit them on size, type, numbers, allow them, don't allow them, all those kinds of things. And there's actually a whole nother video I've done on pets and why you want to allow them in your rental, but also assistance animals. So assistance animals, we cannot control. If somebody has a legitimate assistance animal, and that is a cat, for example, we have to allow it. So sometimes property owners come to us and say, hey, I want to move back into this property, so I want you to guarantee that no cats will be living in this property because I'm allergic to cats and I want to make sure that I'm not exposed to that. Well, then you probably shouldn't have a rental because we can't guarantee that. We can as it relates to pets, but as it relates to assistance animals, we cannot eliminate those assistance animals if they are legitimate assistance animals. So again, the idea behind this is not to scare the heck out of you. This stuff doesn't all happen all day, every day, but it can happen. And you just want to make sure you're prepared for that and you know some of the risks that might come up. So let's talk about your available financial resources. So do you have reserves? And in this regard, you don't necessarily have to have a pile of cash in the bank. but you have access to money. So maybe that's credit card, maybe that's home equity line of credit, maybe that's friends, family, whatever it may be. You want to make sure you have some access to money should you need it. I would recommend making sure you have access to at least 6 months of expenses. So this is things like mortgage payments, HOA dues, repair costs at $150 again is what you want to keep in mind. And that's actually a number that we developed in 2024. We did an analysis of our entire portfolio, and what we found, irrespective of square footage, bedrooms, baths, age of property, any of that stuff, we just took the total number of properties we manage, the total amount we spent in maintenance, and did the math, and it came out to about $150 per month for maintenance. So you want to make sure you have availability for that as well. And the other thing financial reserves will do is they'll help you make better decisions, and specifically better pricing decisions. So what that does is if you have that money, oftentimes, especially in a market that's down, is we have to make rental rate adjustments down. And so what that allows you to do is have that comfort that knowing, hey, I know it's going to get rented. It might not be as much as I was originally hoping for, but I'm going to make sure I make those rental rate adjustments so that I don't keep the rent high and it stays vacant for even longer, which costs me even more money. So that's the idea behind that. So financial resources are something you want to keep in mind as well. So what are your long-term goals for the property? Some common ones are people decide they want to build wealth. So now instead of just selling a property, they say, hey, you know what, maybe it's a good idea. I just hang on to this house and build some wealth with it. Maybe they want to pass on the property to their children, or a very common one is they want to move back in. So they say, hey, I'm going to plan, maybe I'm in the military, I'm going to be away for 2 years or however long, or maybe I took another job somewhere, but I want to come back. So I want to move back on the property. Well, obviously I can't sell the property and then try and buy it back in 3 years and guarantee that I could buy it back. So, hey, I'll rent it for that period of time so that I can move back into it. Or maybe you're in a situation where you just have no equity right now. And so you don't want to show up at closing with that $32,000 to close the house. So you say, you know what, I'll rent it for a few years and then let appreciation do its thing, and I'll come back in 3 years and sell it. And so that's something that a lot of clients as well are considering is, I just want to sell this as soon as possible. So what should you do? Rent versus sell? Well, first of all, consider all the factors, not just the financial analysis. The right answer is for you to decide. Like I said, rentals aren't for everybody. I don't believe they should be for everybody. So make sure you consider carefully. The financial piece is only one piece of that consideration. And if you found this video helpful, subscribe below for more video tips like this.